So, welcome to my lecture recital this evening. This is a lecture recital that goes together with a doctoral document or dissertation that I wrote titled Deconstructing the Tabla Solo, a visual analysis using the McDonald-Matabetsky notation system. So what this recital will be is a 30-minute lecture about the document itself, followed by a 30-minute performance implementing some of the things I'm talking about today. And this project really started with, and the idea of this project was really started with when I started Tabla, this North Indian instrument. And my journey with Tabla began about 4 years ago exactly. I randomly received a set of tabla for Christmas from my lovely parents. They were just like, oh, we thought you'd enjoy this percussion instrument. And little did I know it was maybe the most difficult instrument I've ever had to play. So it's been a really fun journey. But when I started, I had absolutely no idea how to access this drum, how to even set it up, how to make a sound. And I realized very quickly that nobody in my community knew how to play it. And none of my percussion teachers thus far in my career had much knowledge of it either. And because it's a very rare drum in our part of the world. So I wondered, why is this instrument largely absent in Western percussion curricula? And one might say, well, it's because it's from India. Yes, this is true, but in the West, we also play a lot of instruments from all over the world. Many instruments from Latin percussion instruments from Cuba, and African Ewe drumming is also very popular over here. But I found that this particular instrument was less so, at least in the Midwest where I was. And so I wondered, why is this so absent in the curriculum? Why don't we teach this? And I quickly found out there's a very steep learning curve to this instrument. So I think that's maybe one of the reasons. But I think also perhaps more so is because of the accessibility. There's not that many method books or even just approaches on the instrument. There are some doctoral dissertations like I'm giving tonight that cover it, but those can be kind of daunting and not as accessible. And I think there are some cultural and pedagogical differences between how this instrument is taught in North India and how we learn music in North America. This instrument is taught through an oral tradition, and nothing is written down. And in our society, in our culture, much of the music is written down. Growing up through conservatory training, I get a snare drum book. I can read along and play. Even conga, learning how to play that, I've seen it written on Western staff and drum set as well. So I wondered, it might be kind of interesting to present this, not a method book per se for this instrument, because I do believe in the oral tradition, and I think it's very powerful and wonderful. But I wondered if maybe there was a way to create a bird's eye view, just a guide of explaining what a tabla solo is, and hopefully get people interested in the instrument. So that's what the focus of this document is. It is to spread the awareness of the tabla's history, its oral tradition, and performance practices in the Banaras Gharana. And the Banaras Gharana is a specific musical lineage from North India that teaches this instrument. And then the second part of the document was to provide a transcription and visual analysis of a traditional tabla solo that is accessible to a Western audience. Because we have, through some further research, there are some transcriptions out there, but they are notated in a way that you'll see later uses solfege-like characters and syllables that we don't use in the West. And so if you're not already studying the instrument, they make absolutely zero sense to a Western audience. So I was hoping for a transcription that was more accessible. And so the target audience then was musicians that are already familiar with Western rhythmic and melodic notation, because I thought that would be the most accessible way for a Western society to access this drum, learn more about it, and then go and actually learn it through its oral tradition. So to begin, let's talk about what this instrument is. I'm sure many of you, maybe many of you are seeing this for the first time. And if so, I'm happy to introduce you to it then. So this is collectively called the tabla. It's made up of two different drums. We have the drum on my right, which is called dahina, and conveniently in Hindi, dahina means right. And then the drum on my left, this larger drum, is called baya, and on Hindi, baya means left. On the top of the drum, you'll see the skin. This is goat skin, and it is applied with an immense amount of pressure on this rosewood shell. And then pressure is with these rawhide straps that are then hammered down with these blocks to create more tension on this drum head. So it's a very high-pitched sound. And then you'll see there's also a black dot. This is called the siai. And the siai effectively drops the pitch of the drum so that it is allowed to resonate and create a very nice bell-like sustain. If the siai was not on this drum, it would sound very much like this. No resonance. But with the siai, it's very much like a beautiful bell almost. So this is the dahina. And then on the left side, the baya is similar. It has the siai, but it is a much lower pitch. So this is a bass tone. So together, we have capabilities of producing many different sounds. It is an instrument that is about 500 years old and originated in North India. And its predecessor, I'm actually lucky enough to have on stage with you tonight, with me, is it's called the pakawaj. So the tabla originated from a drum much like this. It's more like a barrel with two heads. The bass portion on this side, which is not quite as low, and this side. So this is the predecessor to the tabla. And some of the performance practices that we use on this drum today originated from here. So I mentioned the word gharana, the Banaras gharana earlier. The tabla sort of went through 6 different gharanas, 6 different musical lineages, which I'll talk about in a second. And then it was taught through an oral tradition, which I'll also talk more about here in a minute. This is a map of India just to show you the 6 different gharanas, or musical lineages. And so musical lineage, gharana specifically, it's more than just a lineage, it's a blood lineage. It comes down through a family, passed down through the oral tradition, through the generations. So there's 6 different gharanas. Punjab, Delhi, Ajara, Farrukhabad, Lucknow, and Banaras, which is modern-day Varanasi. Varanasi has changed its name many times over the years. It's one of the oldest continuously living cities in the world. It's older than Jerusalem and Athens. It's quite a fascinating place. And I just spent the last 6 months over there studying this instrument and its performance practices and its history. So yeah, it's a really neat place. You can see, and I just zoomed in, but you can see all of these gharanas are in the north of India. So there's 2 different musical systems in India. You have the northern Hindustani classical music, and then you have in the south, South Indian Carnatic conical style of music. They're very different. And this instrument is the primary percussion instrument in the north, and the south has a different set of instruments they use. But nowadays, it's very popular everywhere in India. But this is where it originated, up in the north here. So the gharana that I'm specializing in, and I'll talk about today, is the Banaras gharana. This is a family tree, partial family tree of the Banaras gharana, but it started with a man named Ram Sahai, Pandit Ram Sahai, who lived from 1780 to 1826. And I'll zoom in just a minute so you can see a few names, but just observing from here, you can see some names are written in blue and some names are written in black. The blue names refer to people in the Gharana that are direct descendants of the founder, Ram Sahai. And the names written in black are disciples that have learned from, but were not direct family members. So I had the privilege of learning from two different teachers in this Gharana. The first was Sean Matavetsky, who many of you met last night during our percussion masterclass. Sean Matavetsky teaches at McGill University and studied this instrument first with the man to his left, Bob Becker, who many of you I'm sure know as well. And they both studied with a man named Sharda Sahai, who is in the top left-hand corner of this. And Sharda Sahai is a direct descendant of this Gharana. The second man I studied with is a man named Kishore Kumar Mishra, who's also a direct descendant. Actually, I think his grandmother is sisters with Sharda Sahai's father. So these are the two gentlemen that I studied with in this Gharana. And both taught me through the oral tradition. So this oral tradition, how this works is there are solfege-like syllables. So in Western music, many of you know do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Similar solfege-like syllables exist in Indian music, and they derive from the Hindi alphabet, the Sanskrit alphabet. And these syllables are spoken, and they correspond to a specific sound on these drums. So, ge, na, te, tenna. And these sounds are memorized, and you know what they correspond to. And the teacher will present a composition orally, speak it, and then the student has to memorize it and then play it on the drums. So that's how, in a nutshell, that's how this music is learned traditionally. I think there are multiple advantages to this system, and having studied it, I would say like the top three for me, where I think it teaches students to really listen and observe, because we remove any obstruction of sheet music. We can really just focus on our technique. We can focus on our teacher's technique who's right in front of us, and listen. And so that's a really beautiful advantage to this tradition. Second, it strengthens memorization, because you have to learn it orally. Then you have to really know it, because you're not reading it. You have to pull it from your mind and then translate it, dictate it, so to speak, on the drums. And third, it improves improvisation. There's much of this tradition, much in the tradition is improvised. So there are a lot of fixed compositions, pre-composed, but then a lot of the tradition is also improvised. So it's pretty neat. I think there's one disadvantage for Western learners, and that is just the language barrier. Like I said, this is through an oral tradition that uses solfege-like syllables. And if I've studied a little bit of Hindi as well. The way the Hindi alphabet works and the sounds that are created is a little different from how we speak in English. They have different ways. They use the tongue to create different sounds and everything. So sometimes for me, when I'm learning a composition, I don't hear correctly what is said, and so there's some discrepancy. I may memorize it incorrectly. But more importantly, if it's written down, because you can write these solfege syllables down, sometimes we have a sound that written down means two different things, actually. So for example, I'll talk a little bit about these sounds. The first line up here you see is the Devanagari script. This is how Hindi is written. And then underneath, I've translated into Roman script. So the first one up there is na, and you see a little line above the a, meaning the vowel is a longer sound. This sound is played on chanti, and you can see on the visual diagram up there where I'm playing on the drum head. Chanti is the very edge of the drum. This is na. Na is the next one. And you hear there's a little difference in how I say that, na versus na. Na can be played in multiple places. Here, which can also be called te, can also be called na here, which can also be called tin, depending on what composition you're playing. So for me, and at the time when I started this instrument, I was like, well, this is very confusing Is it te or is it na? What is it? But it's in English, we have similar words, right? I mean, there, and there. These are three different words that have three different meanings. They're spelled differently, but they sound the same. And this is similar. It sounds the same, but meaning is different in the context. And the more you play the instrument, the more fluent you become and understand the context, which one it is. But that, for me, I thought, if I were going to introduce this to a Western audience, it would be nice to say, okay, this, you can see this 10, and that means 10. Versus this can also mean 10, but it also can mean other sounds, tun. So I wanted to, I wish there was a way to map this visually on a 5-line staff that we use in Western music. And it turns out there was. And I was very excited when I found out about this system, the MacDonald-Matevetsky Tabla notation system. This was created by Peyton MacDonald and Sean Matevetsky, whom I referenced earlier, who were both tabla players in this gharana, but they were interested in incorporating this instrument into Western chamber music and solo music such that Western composers and collaborators could understand visually what's going on with rhythmic contour and pitch contour specifically. So they created a system back in 2003, I believe, that is very intuitive to Western learners because it uses a 5-line staff and it descends from the highest note at the top of the staff down to the lowest note at the bottom of the staff. And each sound, no matter what gharana you learn from, no matter what definition you call this, if it's te or na, it maps that accordingly to a specific point, a space or line, so there's no discrepancy. So just to give you an example of how this notation works, like I said, the low notes are on the bottom, so ge, 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 ge. Na, 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 at the top. If you play 2 notes together, on the second line you can see da, 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 da. And then some other examples, ke, ke, te, te. These are closed sounds in the spaces. Dara, dara, ki, ta, ta, ka, da. And so I thought, okay, this is really neat. What if I transcribe some of the compositions I'm learning through the oral tradition, just as a guide, to see how that would look. Could look something then like this. So immediately, for a Western audience, who's the target audience for this document, can understand from this transcription rhythmic contour is very clear. So they can understand rhythm and timbral differences between bass notes and higher notes. So next, I want to talk a little bit about what happens in a traditional tabla solo. You're about to hear a solo, so I want to just go through a few of the compositions that make up this solo. First of all, tabla music revolves around time cycles, which are known as tal. And there's many. Just like in Western music, we have 7/8, 5/8, 4/4, 3/4. They have cycles that are made up of 16 beats, 15 beats, 14 beats, every single number possible. And in this solo tonight will be in tin tal, which is 16 beats. Then there's an accompanying instrument that keeps time with a looping melody called the lera. And so the lera repeats a melody and emphasizes when beat 1 is, which is sam, beat 1 of the cycle, so that the tabla player has reference of time, and also so the audience has a reference of where they are in the cycle. So then the tabla player will perform a series of compositions that are fixed and improvised over the cycle. So here is an example of the tal that I will be playing today in tin tal, which is 16 beats long. And it can be clapped so that the audience can kind of follow along. And so we'll do a little audience participation now. I'll teach you all how to clap tin tal. It's 16 beats long. We're going to clap on beats 1, and then we're going to use our pinky on 2, ring finger on 3, and our middle finger on 4. Let's try that. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Excellent. You're already ready. Some of you are professionals. You did this yesterday. So then we repeat that. In 5, 6, 7, 8, it's the same thing. But then on 9, 10, 11, 12, it's a little different. Instead of clapping on 9, we're going to wave, and then touch our thumb and our pinky together, ring finger and thumb, and middle finger and thumb. Then on 13, 14, 15, 16, back to normal. Clap, pinky, ring, middle. Let's try the whole thing. 1, 2, ready, go. Da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da, tin, tin, da, da, din, din, da. Good, excellent. And then that just keeps repeating and looping. So if you're bored and you want to like kind of keep time, you can do that when I perform. You heard me speaking some syllables. Da, din, din, da, da, din, din. These are the solfege syllables that correspond to the instrument. So this can be clapped and waved. It can also be played and shown on the drum. Da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da, tin, tin, na, na, din, din, da. So you hear the bass left when you did the line with the wave. On 10 and 11, there was no bass, and then also 12 and 13, and then it comes back. Here is an example of the tabla solo structure. These are compositional forms that you'll hear throughout, and there's 9 of them here. They can be kind of confusing, all jumbled up. I really like the way Sean Medovetsky categorizes them. It makes a lot of sense, so I've kind of adopted that here. They can be sort of chunked together in an introduction, development, and conclusion. The first composition, or form, is called the bhumika, which literally means introduction in Hindi. And then the solo, the bhumika, will start off with a vilambit tempo, which means slow. And its characteristics are generally made up of slower rhythms, fuller sounds, so the tabla player sort of has a time to warm up and explore all the different sounds. But the one thing is there's no resonant bass. So if a bass note is played, it's a closed sound like this. Then comes the utan, and this is signaled with resonant bass. So once you then hear resonant bass, that means, oh, we're now in the next composition, the utan. And it's made up of generally faster, more denser rhythms, and it will end with something called a tihai. And a tihai is a cadential phrase. Generally ends on beat 1. It can end on any predetermined number in the cycle, but generally on beat 1. So it's a phrase that's repeated 3 times, such that the very last note will coincide with sam, which is beat 1 of the cycle. Then sometimes you'll hear mukra or mora, which are smaller compositions, less than a cycle long, that emphasize beat 1. So you don't have to hear all 3 of these in a composition. You could hear just bhumika utan, or maybe you just hear mora and mukra. That's up to the performer and their mood in that particular time. But the difference between a mora and mukra, simply put, is whether or not it has a tihai. A mora will have a tihai, the cadential phrase, and a mukra will not. The development section, this is where the tabla player uses more amounts of improvisation. So the kaida section, this is a fixed theme. It's like a theme and variation form. So you have a fixed theme, and then there are some variations that are performed that are improvised. But the form of the kaida is what we call kuli mundi, and it's almost like a rhyme. You have a short number of bulls that are played with bass, resonance, and then a portion of it is repeated without bass, and then the bass returns. So there's 4 sections, da da te te, da da tinna, and then the rhyme of that, da da te te, da da dinna. And the rhyme. So, and I'll go into a little bit more detail of that here in just a second. But it also ends with a tihai. Rela follows the same structure as Kaida, so it has the theme and it has improvised variations, and then also ends with a T-high. The difference mainly is the speed at which it's played. It mimics the sound of a railroad, of a train on a railroad track, so it's very fast. So it uses specific types of sounds that are more idiomatic at those speeds. And then in between some of the Rela variations, we have other compositions called gut and fard that are interspersed. So these are fixed compositions that are played in multiple speeds. So you might hear a Rela going on, so something really fast, and then it all of a sudden drops tempo. And it goes to something completely different, almost unrelated. And this is a fixed composition called a gut or a fard. The guts follow the same Kuli Mundi rhyme or Kuli Mundi form as I just mentioned, and a fard does not. But a fard does use, they generally have a composition or endings that are similar. And then in the conclusion section, the tempo is boosted much faster, called a Madhya tempo, and these compositions are multiple cycles long. They're generally performed twice, once vocally and once percussively. So you'll hear me speak the bowls, the sounds, to showcase the oral tradition, and then I'll perform them on the instrument. And it also ends with a T-high. The difference mainly between Tukra and Paran are, Tukra is made up of bursts of virtuosic technique that were developed specifically for this instrument, so they favor more non-resonant sounds. And I mean, some resonant sounds are also used. It's not like dogmatic or anything, but that's what they favor. And then Paran favors more repetitive phrasing and resonant bass. And these compositions derive from the predecessor instrument, the pakawaj. This is more bombastic, louder style of playing, and so that's kind of what the Paran stylistically is mimicking. So this is, okay. Let me go back. Yeah. So I want to talk about Kaida just a little bit more. We don't have time to talk about all the compositions. We'd be here for 4 years, which is how long I've been playing. But at least we can go through a few, and then as you hear the compositions in context, I'll point them out to you. But like I said, this is a theme and variation. It uses a small variety of bowls, and it reflects the structure of tintal, so there's that rhyming mechanism that I talked about, da da te te da da tinna, and it rhymes with da da te te da da dinna. Well, yeah. So you can see that here visually with the bowls written out, da da te te da da tinna, and then no bass, da da te te bass. And how that would look in a Western notation is here. So you have the bass on measures 1 and 2, and then measures 3, it's removed and returned on measure 4. That structure, that ratio of 4 parts with bass, bass, no bass, and then bass is always in play with Kaida. So if I were, because when we improvise, we can do things like expand the compositional length, we can double it, but if we double it, then we have to keep that ratio. So instead of, what this diagram is showing is the black squares refer to like one section or one measure with bass resonance, and the white squares represent one measure with no bass resonance. So like I said, we have da da te te, da da tinna, and then da da te te with no bass, and then da da dinna with bass. So that's the first line with black, black, white, black. If we double that, then instead of 2 parts with bass, we would have 4 parts with bass, and then 2 parts without bass, 2 parts with bass. And that sort of ratio will continue, has to continue with Kaida. So that way the audience has an idea of where they are, where the tabla player is in the variations. Here's an example of some variations. So I could double the length, and it has to end with the original theme. Usually, it's nice if it ends with the original theme, so the audience goes back. Oh, you've improvised, and then there's the original theme. I remember that. Okay, cool. So the original theme was. If I doubled that, then we could double the first part of that, for example, da da te te. Play it again. And now the theme. And now the rhyme over all of that. Da da te te, da da te te, da da te te, da da te te. Then each variation should be connected to the previous one, so there's some sort of logical reference. So in the next one, I could group all the das together, and then all the tes together. And then the theme, and now the rhyme. So those are just a couple of examples of how variations can work. When they're improvised, sometimes we'll just take a segment of it and we'll repeat it, but then when we repeat it, we have to keep that ratio the same, so then the composition becomes longer. This is an example of what my transcription looks like from the document. And what's nice about this is, yeah, the reader can go through and see, okay, there's where the utan starts. Remember, that's where the bass comes in. So we know this is different from the bhumika. And then the kaidas, I do, in between the margins, I give some commentary on showing why I've gone to this sort of variation, how that logically makes sense from the one previous. And it shows the kuli mundi rhyme, the sections. Then there's I wanted to show this kaida in particular because it shows the strength of this notation system. Tabla music very often uses very complex rhythmical ideas. And this is just kind of a basic one to see. But what's happening here is you see triplets, groupings of 3, but the tabla player is actually emphasizing groupings of 4. So you have dina gina taka taka dina gina dara gigi naga dina taka taka dina gina dara gina dara gigi naga tina dara gina. But the lera, the accompanist, is still emphasizing the true beat, which is every grouping of 3. So it creates a 4 against 3 feel, which is pretty neat. Dina gina taka taka dina gina dara gigi naga dina dara gina dina gina dara gina dina gina. And it's a little bit more interesting. So that's one of the strengths, I think, showing this, so an audience reading this transcription can understand some of the rhythmic ideas going on. So now, what I want to do is perform a tabla solo for you all. I'm going to leave this roadmap up here for you to follow along, and I'll try to announce as I go to another composition, so you're aware of where we are, and then you can kind of refresh your memory on that. So I'll go ahead and invite Isaac, my accompanist, to the stage. Before we play, I do want to thank a few people, particularly my parents. This has been a very long journey coming through the years to get my doctorate, so I'm very thankful for their support and love and encouragement the whole way. I want to thank my guidance committee for their help with the document and suggestions, and I also want to thank specifically my percussion professors that have been so amazing. Professor Dees and Dr. Weber, while they don't specifically play tabla themselves, I think it's a testament to their teaching philosophies and just that they've encouraged me to go after this nonetheless, and really, so it's been neat having that freedom at this institution, learning from them. And I want to thank Sean Matavetsky, my tabla teacher from McGill. We've done many Skype lessons together over the past couple of years, and he was very instrumental in getting my arrangements in India with the teacher I had over there. So thank you, Sean. And thanks to my teacher in India, Kishore Kumar Mishra. I spent the past 5.5 months with him 6 days a week practicing together for 2 hours each. He was so giving with his time and such an amazing inspiration. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this tabla solo in Teen Tal. Just have a little tuning to do, and then we'll get started. So this is a bhumika. So that concludes the utan. You heard the bass come in. Now what I'm playing is the tin ta. Teka, we call it. Tin, da, tin, tin, na, na, din, da, da. And then we can improvise on that theme, tin ta, with just little ornamentations. So you still hear the 16 beats. Now I'll start a kaida. It's going to be presented first in a single speed, and then it'll be played in double speed, and each of the variations will follow in double speed. Now the rhyme. Bass. Double speed. And after the kaida, we return back to the tin tao. Another kaida. play one more kaida for you. Now I'm going to move to the Rela portion. So you'll hear some variations, and then you'll hear the tempo drop, and that is a gut or a fart. So now we've moved the tempo quite a bit faster. To signal the conclusion section, we'll play a series of tukras and parans.
Tagatata kata gena datina gina tina datina 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 kata gina gina datina 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 kata gina gina datina datina datina. Tagatata krada krada kigda din din na 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 katata 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 katata.
The instrument he's playing is actually very difficult, so I feel for it. The last composition I'll play is a paran, so it'll be very repetitive, lots of bass, reminiscent of the pakawaj, this instrument. And that concludes the Tabla.